People admire China. People are curious. People want to know about how China did this. Because we remember, even if a lot of young Chinese people don't, what China was like 60 years ago, what China was like 100 years ago. But we have seen the transition. And we've seen that transition take place in a period where we have stagnated or even fallen behind. China's been moving up. Okay. So when you say to people that China is a socialist or communist country, it makes them sit up. Maybe this communism thing is not so bad. It helps create a conversation. We are just beginning to learn the details of the process as it's obtained in China and learning what variables there are that could be used in Africa. How does this work in our part of the world?
At the end of the day, what matters is the material conditions of people. The living conditions matter. How can you come and tell the Chinese people that their system is bad today? The system that has lifted them out of poverty over a historical shortest period possible. How can you tell them to hate themselves, to hate the effort, the products of their own efforts? For a long time, as Comrade Dopoko has said, they were trying to attribute the Chinese success to capitalism. But the Chinese leaders and the Chinese people are saying we have developed because of socialism. That's what President Xi Jinping is telling the world, is telling us. That's what we are learning from them.
Since its inception in 2006, the BRICS cooperation mechanism has steadily developed into a stable platform for dialogue and cooperation between its members: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
In your opinion, how important is BRICS? What kind of difference it can bring to the global south?
Yeah, BRICS right now, it's maybe one of the most important initiatives we have politically in the whole world and economically. So as you said, I mean, that right now there's the meetings happening. BRICS today is 5 countries. China, I mean, if you take from GDP, PPP, which is the real GDP, the purchase parity power. So China is the biggest economy in the world. India is the 3rd. Russia is the 6th. And Brazil is the 8th. So of 8 economies, the 4 out of 8 are in BRICS.
President Xi Jinping has called on the G20 to work together to meet the challenges of our times and build a better future. He said the summit comes at a time of momentous change. He said all countries should advocate peace, development, and win-win cooperation.
As the APEC 2022 chair, Thailand will hold the APEC CEO Summit ahead of the APEC Economic Leaders Meeting. As the first in-person CEO summit in 3 years since the start of the pandemic, the gathering aims to discuss solutions to the world's current and future challenges.
Why do you think alliances like APEC, ASEAN, and all these Southeast Asian countries coming together is so important?
These are countries that have ties and relations and trade that stretch back generations and generations, centuries and centuries. So it seems like a very natural progression socioeconomically and politically. All of these groups of people continuing to work together, trade, travel to one another's nations, increasing understanding among each other. And again, I have watched this region go from a place that was heavily under Western influence to the waning Western imperialism that had been fading away from this region, and it being replaced by actual genuine cooperation, as the Chinese government always says, win-win cooperation. I've watched it happen. I've watched one system fade and one replace it, and you can see the difference. This is a stark contrast.
Xi Jinping arrived in Riyadh Wednesday for the first Arab-China summit. for cooperation and development. He's set to leave tomorrow after meeting with leaders from the Gulf states, including Iraq and Qatar.
Can you share with us your thoughts on the importance of this cooperation between China and the Arab world, and especially what kind of importance, what kind of influence it will bring to the world economy? Especially now we are all witnessing unprecedented changes in the world.
The Arab world, as we people should know, is that it stretches from West Asia, like Iraq, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, and the Gulf countries. But then it crosses over to Africa, to Egypt, North Africa, Sudan, and we have also other countries like the Comoros in the Indian Ocean. This region is very, very important if you look at its location, geographical location. It's at the crossroads between three continents. It's also between Asia, Europe, and Africa. We have the connection between the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, the Mediterranean. So this is one of the most important knots in the global trade and connectivity network, which the Belt and Road Initiative is rebuilding with modern means. The Arab countries are home to almost more than 2/3 of the oil and gas reserves in the world. It has a massive financial reserve, but also a very, very young population with great aspirations and demands for development. So it's a perfect match to have China, which has developed in such a fast fashion to a modern, prosperous nation, and the Arab nations who have similar aspirations, that the two can match each other and work together. And the visit by President Xi Jinping is going to be a massive event in the history of this region, because this is happening, as you said, in a time of massive change in the world, where the world economic pivot is moving to the east with China, East Asia, ASEAN countries, and we have the old geopolitical system is really not functioning. It's threatening with wars, regional wars, but probably, as in the case of Ukraine, we could have a world war emerging out of that. So therefore, there is a very clear indication for these Arab countries where the future lies, and that is in the east. But also, the Arab nations can become a bridge between east and west, so we don't have a divided world once more. But that the world should unite between east and west in the Arab world around principles of economic cooperation and win-win, as President Xi Jinping phrases it, to build a future community for the future of the humankind.
Hello everyone, welcome to Talk It Out with me, Li Jingjing, live from Beijing. This show aims to show you the real stories and voices from China and the rest of the global south, especially those that are often neglected by the Western mainstream media. Looks like there are some dangerous trends in the Pacific region. The United States never stopped trying to create conflicts in this region and increasing its military presence. They are already encircling China with multiple military bases in Japan, in Guam, and in the Philippines. So are we closer to a war in this region? What will happen next? We will take a deep dive into this topic in this live stream. Later in this stream, two guests will join me for a discussion. One is from Taiwan, and he will provide us with a thorough look into the current situation in Taiwan. The other guest is a geopolitical analyst in Thailand who will give his analysis of the Pacific region. So leave a comment and a question, send your questions and comments in the live chat, keep the live chat going. There's a laptop in front of me. I'm also watching your live chat, so we will try to read your comments, answer questions during this live stream. So keep it going. I will try to read it. And I'm seeing that a lot of you have been chatting for a while, even before I started this live stream. So thank you so much. And you know what? Before I invite the two guests coming on to the show, have a discussion, let me walk you through the major world headlines first. First, I think it's very important to address the devastating earthquake in southeastern Turkey and northern Syria. Turkey changed its country's name to Turkey, their Turkish name. So let's call Turkey by the name they want, Turkey. So the earthquake is believed to be the strongest since 1939, when an earthquake of the same magnitude of 7.8 struck the eastern part of Turkey. And even rarer, this time, a second trauma occurred less than 10 hours after the first, 7.5 in magnitude. Hundreds of aftershocks followed. Thousands of buildings collapsed, trapping people underneath in the freezing temperatures. The death toll rose to more than 8,000, but this number is expected to grow, probably exponentially, as the rescue continues. Turkish President Erdogan on Tuesday declared a state of emergency for 3 months in 10 provinces. Countries around the world dispatched teams to assist in rescue efforts. And China is among the first countries that responded. An 82-member rescue team from China arrived at Turkey on Wednesday to aid at the request of the Turkey government. And before that, a non-government rescue team from China also arrived in the disaster-hit region on Tuesday. China provides its first batch of aid worth 40 million yuan, which is $5.9 million. And China is also coordinating efforts to provide supplies to Syria, which is also being struck by the quake. The Red Cross Society of China will provide $200,000 in cash to the Red Crescent societies of Turkey and Syria. And China will continue to aid Turkey and Syria within its capacity. I know Turkey is being hit hard by the earthquake, but also let's remember Syria was also being struck by the earthquake, especially its northern border with Turkey. And Syria was already a war-torn country under several Western sanctions. People there already had a problem accessing basic necessities like food, securities, water, electricity. Now this devastating natural disaster just makes everything worse. So I really hope that the international community, different countries can come in and help Turkey and Syria. And let's move to the Philippines. The United States expands its presence in Southeast Asia with access to more bases in the Philippines. The two countries announced last week. The newly announced deal will give the U.S. access to 4 more locations under an enhanced defense cooperation agreement dating to 2014, allowing the U.S. to rotate troops to a total of 9 bases throughout the Philippines. The U.S. Marine Corps also opened a new base on Guam last week. It will be home to about 5,000 Marines and will serve as a strategic hub for the United States in the Pacific region. The location, known as Camp Blas, is the first new Marine base in 70 years, and one day is expected to host 5,000 Marines. So this increased access to military bases in the Philippines would potentially place U.S. armed forces fewer than 200 miles south of the Taiwan Islands. This increased military presence in the region is apparently trying to encircle China and counter China. So it's pretty hilarious. They were freaking out about a weather balloon flying over the sky while they have 800 million, that's a huge number. Well, they have 800 military bases across the world. And they're still increasing that military presence in the region. And they are freaking out over a weather balloon? Really? So what a interesting week. Okay, let's move to Taiwan. So a leaked memo from a U.S. 4-star general said his gut told him that the U.S. would be at war with China in 2025. The person who said it is U.S. 4-star Air Force General Mike Minihan. he warned his troops, "My gut tells me we will fight in 2025." The Pentagon says that Minihan's comments are not representative of the department's view on China, but it looks like the Republican chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Michael McCaul, seems to agree with this statement. This is what he said to Minihan's statement. "I hope he's wrong as well. I think he's right, though, unfortunately." This is what Michael McCaul said on Fox News Sunday. So that leads to the major topic of our stream today. Will China and the US be at war over the Taiwan region? What's next for Taiwan? And joining me today are two guests with thorough knowledge and who did a thorough research into this. So joining me from Taiwan is Zhong Xiangyu, a political commentator and researcher who is from Taiwan and also lived in the United States. So Xiangyu, welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me on, Jing. And good to be back with you as well, Brian.
Yes, my other guest joining me from Bangkok is Brian Berletic, who is a geopolitical analyst and a former US Marine Corps. So Brian, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me back on. And looks like Xiangyu has me outdressed.
You outdressed me last time, so I had to one-up you this time.
Okay, I see a competition there. So, you know what, I just briefed our viewers about the recent changes in the Pacific region, and I love to hear you guys' takes on this. But before that, I want to show our viewers a video we made, which explains the history of the Chinese mainland and Taiwan, and how the international community, the United Nations, and basically every country that has a diplomatic relations with China, including the United States, recognize Taiwan as part of China. So take a look.
After China's civil war, the Republic of China, or ROC, was exiled to Taiwan in 1949. The same year, the People's Republic of China, PRC, was founded. In 1971, the UN voted to welcome the PRC as the only legitimate government of China. The ROC was no longer recognized. The historic change paved the foundation for the 3 joint communiques, which would ensure the bilateral relations between China and the US. The first joint communique was signed in 1972. In the document, the US acknowledged that all Chinese on either side of the Taiwan Strait maintain there's only one China, and Taiwan is part of China. The second joint communique was published in 1978, which formally announced the commencement of normal relations between Washington and Beijing. In the document, the U.S. affirmed that the PRC was the legitimate government of China. The third joint communique was issued in 1982, when the U.S. stated that it did not seek a long-term policy of arms sales to Taiwan. Citing these agreements, Beijing has repeatedly said that the so-called official exchanges with Taiwan is not acceptable. When President Xi Jinping spoke with President Joe Biden on July 28th, President Xi emphasized that the historical ins and outs of the Taiwan question are crystal clear. He said the U.S. should honor the One China principle and implement the 3 joint communiques both in word and in deed.
The United States of America and the People's Republic of China have agreed to recognize each other and to establish diplomatic relations as of January the 1st, 1979. The United States recognizes the government of the People's Republic of China as a sole legal government of China. Within this context, the people of the United States will maintain cultural, commercial, and other unofficial relations with the people of Taiwan. The government of the United States of America acknowledges the Chinese position that there is but one China, and Taiwan is part of China.
181 countries have now established diplomatic relations with the PRC. All of them acknowledge the One China principle and promise to handle the relations with Taiwan within the One China framework.
Yep. So this is the fact that most Western mainstream media don't mention. they constantly play the word game in their coverage, trying to create an illusion for audiences outside of China, making them believe that China and Taiwan are two different things, even though their government officially recognized that there's only one China and Taiwan is part of China. So I just want to show our viewers all these historical facts. But Xiangyu, let me go to you first, because you recently returned to Taiwan from the United States. So can you tell us what's the mood in Taiwan? How do people in Taiwan feel about this U.S. provocations?
So remember last year when Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, a lot of the pro-DPP media, so DPP is the Democratic Progressive Party, which is the current ruling party of Taiwan. They were like, oh, this is a great landslide victory. This will secure our victory in the November midterms. But as we saw in November, the DPP suffered great losses. And recently, I think from what I've seen, with the exception of pro-DPP mainstream media and so-called liberal so-called intellectuals, the vast majority of people here are displeased with these visits by U.S. officials and these increased provocations. And according to a poll released in January by the NED-adjacent and DPP-aligned NGO called Taiwan Foundation for Democracy, 51% of young adults between the ages of 20 and 24 are doubtful of America. And this trend, in Chinese, they call it 以美论. So it's like the theory of doubting the U.S., if I may do a rough translation. And this may be attributed, sorry?
You translated right.
And this may be attributed to the possibility of a war in the future. 38% of people all across the board, of all ages, according to the same poll, believe the actions taken by the United States are gradually pushing Taiwan into war. And although 38% is not the majority, it is significant because this figure has increased from the past. So these attitudes are changing. And I must point out that the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy is by no means anti-U.S., yet according to them, they believe these doubtful attitudes towards the U.S. will only increase in the near future. Meanwhile, supporters of the DPP and Taiwan separatists are attacking these attitudes. They're getting desperate. They're attacking these attitudes of doubt online in droves and are continuing to defend the actions of the U.S. So from this reaction, we can see that the ideas that are not in line with U.S. interests are becoming more popular in Taiwan. And with the exception of more hardline supporters of the DPP, the general public is increasingly questioning the motives of the U.S. So they're desperately trying to suppress these things, but they can't change the fact that many people see clearly that the U.S. is trying to use the people on Taiwan to fight mainland China on behalf of the U.S. government and are becoming increasingly impatient with the DPP for playing along, all while neglecting the people's livelihood.
Thank you. Well, very interesting. Good to know, because good to hear from someone who is actually on the ground and know what's happening in Taiwan, because that's different from what we hear from the Western mainstream media. And Brian, I will go to you, because how do you make the U.S. general's statement that he believed, his gut feeling told him that China and the U.S. will be at war over the Taiwan region in 2025?
Well, this is an interesting comment, and it's interesting the way the Western media has tried to interpret it. They tried to make it out as if China is the one rushing to war with the United States, and it'll leave the United States with no choice but to fight China thousands of miles away from America's own territory, its own shores, over Taiwan. Now, what's interesting is the video intro to this topic that you just played. If people go to the U.S. State Department's official website right now, it will say on their website that they don't promote or support Taiwan independence. So they make it very clear that everything that was in that video introduction about Taiwan being part of China and how the vast majority of the world recognizes this is a fact. And it's interesting how the Western media, in a very concerted way, just as you say, they play these word games to lead audiences into believing that somehow Taiwan is an independent country in one way or the other, and that China is bullying it. So this creates the impression in people's minds somehow that China is bullying Taiwan, and the U.S. will have no choice but to go to war with China over Taiwan. But the reality is the U.S. is in a rush to go to war with China. It's the other way around. It's always projection, because the gap between China and the U.S. militarily and economically is closing. And by 2025, 2030, somewhere in there, the window will not only have completely closed, but the disparity will begin to grow, but in China's favor. So the U.S. feels they need to wage a armed conflict with China now, when they still have a small chance of somehow achieving or advancing their geopolitical objectives, because once that window of opportunity closes, there will be no hope for the U.S. to do it from that point on. It's actually the U.S. rushing to war with China by 2025. That's what they mean.
It sounds a lot like they are preparing the public in the United States, and also preparing their troops that, hey, just a heads up that we're going to go to war with China in 2025. So if it happens, don't be surprised. So do you think they are preparing the American people for a potential war with China?
Oh, you're asking me?
I'm sorry.
I would say yeah.
Yeah, Brian. Yeah, I was asking.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. That's what this whole balloon fiasco was all about. It was about doing to the American mindset regarding China what they've already done regarding Russia, the whole Russiagate, this fabricated claim that Russia was interfering in American elections. Somehow the Russians were a threat to U.S. national security. This created hysteria and hatred, irrational hatred toward Russia, that they were then able to harness in this proxy war that we see taking place in Ukraine right now against Russia. And they're doing the exact same thing in regards to China. So the whole balloon fiasco, they claim that this has already happened in the past, but I don't remember this level of hysteria and hatred being stirred up before. So why all of a sudden? Because it's politically expedient, and I think we can expect much more of this to come. And unfortunately, when it comes to China, the American public is much more inclined to hate China, because Chinese people look different, they have a different language, it seems very alien to the average American who's poorly informed about the rest of the world, and it just makes it that much easier for the establishment to take advantage of that ignorance and kind of push it in the direction toward hatred. I have a very bad feeling about how this is all going to go.
Mm-hmm. And Xiangyu, do you want to comment on this? How do people in Taiwan feel about this statement coming from a high-ranking U.S. official?
I saw a comment on the other day on the internet, not just one comment, many of them saying, "Oh, it sounds like he's planning it, not just feeling it, or maybe not him as an individual, but that he's basically saying that there are forces out there that are actually planning this scenario for this to happen." And I think when it comes to a war situation in Taiwan, many people over here feel that the capture of the island by the PLA is very easy. And this is what the RAND Corporation thinks, according to the military experts they've consulted. But many people here think that such a scenario would simply be an operation to remove the current leadership, and thus a military situation wouldn't have too great of an impact on the people. And there are even people now joking how it'll be, in Chinese they call it 早上攻台小换证. So it's like in the morning, Taiwan will be attacked, and by the afternoon, we'll all be lining up to get new ID cards under a new administration. However, I'd say young men have a different perspective, because there is a compulsory military service here, and they worry about how should a cross-strait war occur, there is a great possibility that they'll have to go and fight. So it's difficult for them to look at this situation nonchalantly without feeling uneasy, and hence they're more worried about a mainland attack on Taiwan in response to U.S. provocations. And these sentiments are also in response to the DPP administration extending military service from 4 months back to a year for those born in 2005 and after.
Thank you. And I just want to remind our viewers, please hit the like button to help this live stream being promoted by the YouTube. And also leave a comment, leave a questions, and me and Brian and Xiangyu, we will try to answer them when we can. And also, please subscribe to my channel, hit the bell so you will get a notification whenever we publish a new content. So yeah, just like Brian said, whenever you hear there's going to be a war between China and the United States, or China is going to use military force, and every time you hear that, it's from the U.S. side. Every time it's from the U.S. China never said it wants to go to war and never mentioned the date of the war. So I don't know where the U.S. general got a specific date that U.S. and China will be at war. So just like Xiangyu said, it sounds like they are not feeling it, they are planning it. And if anyone looks into what China says about Taiwan, if you really look into it, you will know it's not what some Western media described. So let me show you what China actually said. Take a look at this. So this is what China said about Taiwan. Taiwan is China's Taiwan. Resolving the Taiwan question is a matter for the Chinese, a matter that must be resolved by the Chinese. We will continue to strive for peaceful reunification with the greatest sincerity and the utmost effort, but we will never promise to renounce the use of force, and we reserve the option of taking all measures necessary. This is directed solely at interference by outside forces and the few separatists seeking Taiwan independence and their separatist activities. It is by no means targeted at our Taiwan compatriots. And it continues. Blood runs thicker than water. The fellow Chinese on both sides of the Taiwan Straits are one family bound by blood. We have always shown respect and care for our Taiwan compatriots and work to deliver benefits to them. We will continue to promote economic and cultural exchanges and cooperations across the straits, advance our integrated development in all fields, and improve systems and policies that contribute to the well-being of our Taiwan compatriots. Complete reunification of our country must be realized, and it can, without a doubt, be realized. So this is from the work report delivered to the 20th Party Congress in October 2022, but it's also the same stance that China has been repeatedly saying, but just this many Western media don't really report the full statement. They keep saying, "Oh, China is refused to abandon the use of force, or China's gonna use military force to attack Taiwan." But in fact, what China says, we will do everything we can to have a peaceful reunification. They want a peaceful reunification, but they won't abandon the use of force if foreign forces and separatists want to create independence or want to involve. So this is what they said. So I hope you, since like most Western media don't report this, so I want to show the complete description of the China's stance. So
can I add something?
Yeah, sure.
You know how a lot of times Western liberals will talk about how China needs a Western-style democracy. Well, I can tell you that if China had a Western-style democracy, people will vote for reunification by force tomorrow because people are getting impatient. It's actually the party that's being a little bit more cool about it and patient.
Mm-hmm. By the way, I'm just curious because you are from Taiwan and you lived in the Chinese mainland before, and you also lived in the United States, and you strongly support their peaceful reunification. How come? Because I think many Westerners probably will be puzzled at this. Like, how come you lived in the United States, enjoy the true democracy and freedom, and you still support China? What? So what are you gonna say?
Well, one correction, I haven't lived on the mainland before, but I have visited, especially a few times, especially between 2017 and 2019. So I see that this question implies that my views are atypical for somebody who is Taiwanese of my generation, which is true. And hopefully people recognize that I do not try to pass off my views as representative of the typical Taiwanese, but what I like to do is I will explain why I think the way I do, and also explain why the average person in Taiwan thinks the way they do. So this will have to go into a little bit of family history, if you don't mind me making like a 5-minute detour.
Sure, go on.
Okay.
We got time.
The Taiwanese person in my family is my mother, and she is what we call 本省人, or local Taiwanese, meaning somebody whose family has been in Taiwan since the Qing dynasty at the latest. And she is 6th generation Taiwanese. Her ancestors came from Zhangzhou and Fujian province. And in the U.S., most of my parents' friends are actually 外省人, or extra-provincial people, meaning those whose families arrived in Taiwan sometime between 1945 and the mid-1950s, mostly in 1949. And my father is technically a 外省人, but he is also pretty atypical because he was born to a Chinese father in South Korea. And back then, the South Korean government did not recognize the children of foreigners as their citizens. And the Chinese government that they had diplomatic ties with back then was the one in Taipei, not the one in Beijing. And back then, the KMT was also trying hard to win over overseas Chinese. So he was born a Chinese citizen of the so-called Republic of China and attended a school for overseas Chinese in Seoul. So I bring this up because people from these different backgrounds in Taiwan tend to have different politics. And although I didn't understand all of the details growing up, this is something I noticed. And that being said, it wasn't until the 2000s that the curriculum in Taiwan was changed in a top-down fashion so that children weren't being taught that they're Chinese. So I remember how in the 1990s, everyone in Taiwan called themselves Chinese and saw being Taiwanese as a regional identity. And even in the 2000s, this change was pretty gradual. So it was always something I wanted to make sense of, especially as someone who was taught by my parents that I'm Chinese. And a huge part of my identity was being Chinese. And I never saw being Taiwanese as an antithesis of being Chinese. So I took it upon myself to really study as much of the relevant history as I could, since it seemed like even in Taiwan, there was a lack of a consensus, especially among all generations. And needless to say, Taiwan's had a very turbulent history. The people here have gone through a lot over the past centuries, especially beginning in 1895, which marked the beginning of the initial 50 years of separation from the mainland due to Japanese colonization. And although Taiwan was returned to China in 1945, the Civil War meant that the two sides would be unfortunately separated again. And although both the CPC and the KMT understood the two sides of the strait to be a single country, and they disagreed over who was the rightful representative of China. Then came the anti-CPC sentiments that began with Chiang Kai-shek's propaganda, but also the mishandling of internal contradictions by the KMT, which unfortunately eventually led to a liberal opposition that brewed anti-mainlander sentiments here. And because due to martial law, the elections at the higher level were suspended. And since the KMT arrived to Taiwan from the mainland, everyone in the higher levels of power was a mainlander. So mainlander became associated with KMT. And what they later did was the opportunists were basically like, remember the worst of the KMT? The CPC is the red version of that. But I recognize that the vast majority of 外省人, or the mainlanders in Taiwan, were just normal working people who love both their hometowns on the mainland as well as Taiwan, and that most local Taiwanese are also just hardworking people who want better futures for themselves and their families. And it became clear to me early on that within Taiwan, you had opportunists creating rifts between the different groups of people in Taiwan for their own benefit. It's like a divide and conquer. And unfortunately, you see that happening between Taiwan and the mainland today. So I'm almost done. Clearly, there are many layers of contradictions on this island. And unfortunately, there is a global superpower on the other side of the Pacific that's willing to take advantage of all of these contradictions to advance its foreign policy goals at the expense of Chinese people on both sides of the strait. So the more I understood U.S. imperialism, the more I realized how much honest people in Taiwan are manipulated by the U.S. State Department and the Western elite. through media, NGOs, education, the local political pawns of Washington, D.C. And these are the same people who lied to the American people about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq or the use of chemical weapons by Assad in Syria. And I think I am fortunate in that I can read both Chinese and English. So being able to access information that both the average person in Taiwan or the average person in the U.S. can access does provide me with a more unique worldview. The thing is, a lot of Taiwanese people understand the West through what the media here tells them. But the local media here is essentially a Chinese translation of Western media. You can look at who owns the media here, like a bunch of Western investment funds and all of that. Most people here don't have the experience of growing up in the U.S. and seeing it for what it really is, though. So nor do many study the history of U.S. foreign policy in depth to realize that the U.S. government is not a friend of even the people in the U.S., but instead see it as the protector of democracy and human rights. So I put a lot of thought into what independence and sovereignty mean. And I find that what the Taiwan separatists are fighting for is anything but independence or sovereignty, but rather a deeper integration into the US empire. And this is ridiculous, especially in this day and age when the unipolar world order is dying and the multipolar world order is being born. And when we're being told that being Taiwanese means rejecting our Chinese identity, to me, that means it's erasing the meaning of what it means to be Taiwanese and the forced adoption of this bourgeois liberal cosmopolitanism, where traditional cultures are erased and replaced with an artificial culture that may on the surface seem to celebrate diverse cultures, but at the end of the day exists to facilitate Western hegemony. And both mainland China and Taiwan are what they are today because of the hard work on people of both sides of the strait. Taiwan was built up by generations of migrants from the mainland alongside the indigenous peoples for centuries. And ever since the mainland reformed and opened up, people from Taiwan have made many contributions over the past decades. China belongs to the Chinese people. And that means both mainland China and Taiwan both belong to the people on both sides of the strait. So that's why I support peaceful reunification, because I am a Chinese patriot, because I wish for the Taiwanese people to live as dignified people of a great country with a bright future, instead of living as neocolonial subjects of a dying U.S. empire. I do not wish for the fruits of generations of hard work to go to waste for the benefit of a small clique of political opportunists and their U.S. imperialist overlords. So my conclusion is we should not place trust in the U.S. government when the U.S. government fails to provide even for its own people. That's my long-winded spiel.
Wow, very well said. And thank you for giving this analysis of the real situations, real problems, and how the United States or Western power is trying to use our internal conflicts, internal problems, trying to use this as opportunity to interfere, and divide us. So I think that's not rare. It's just basically happened across the world. It happened in Hong Kong SAR before. It happened across the globe when they see, you have some conflicts, and this is time for them to step in and divide you. So, Brian, do you want to comment on this?
Absolutely, because what Xiangyu is describing is the exact same process the U.S. encouraged, accelerated, deepened in Ukraine, between Ukrainians inside Ukraine, Russian-speaking Ukrainians, and the Western Ukrainians. They sponsored extremism in the West against Russian-speaking Ukrainians. And they overthrew the government of Ukraine in 2014. They transformed Ukraine into this anti-Russian belligerent to create a national security threat right on Russia's borders. It's different than the situation with Taiwan, because Taiwan is part of China. The Republic of China recognizes that. Beijing recognizes that. The United States on the State Department's official website recognizes that. So that is a key difference. But the process of the U.S. inserting itself into the internal political affairs of a targeted region, whether it's a region like Taiwan or a country like Ukraine, and finding those fault lines, socio-political, cultural, ethnic, finding those fault lines and prying them open and making them wider and wider, creating conflict, violent political conflict. I'm watching it take place here in Thailand, in neighboring Myanmar, in the Philippines. We're probably going to talk about the Philippines. And that is what they do. And they do it specifically to transform any group of people into an extension of U.S. foreign policy at the expense of those people. So look at Ukraine. Now they got their wish. These people were essentially brainwashed, again, through media, through education, through the political system, everything Xiangyu was talking about in regards to Taiwan. They got their wish. Now they're fighting Russians, and it's destroying the entire country of Ukraine. And this is exactly what's going to happen to the island of Taiwan if the U.S. gets its way. If people don't learn the lessons that Ukraine is trying to teach the world right now, the situation in Ukraine is trying to teach the world. So Xiangyu said he doesn't want to see all of this progress on both sides of the strait thrown away. It's not just going to disrupt all of China. It's going to disrupt all of Asia. If you look at the trade partners, the main trade partners of every nation in, say, Southeast Asia, it's China. It's China. So if you create a significant military conflict between the U.S. and China over Taiwan, that is going to impact the entire region. It's going to set everyone here back decades. And so that is what we're faced with. And this is all because Washington wants to try to cling to primacy over Asia. Think about that. American primacy over Asia. The U.S. is not even located in Asia. So it is so irrational. And if your starting point is irrational, everything that is built on top of that departs further and further from a stable, sustainable reality.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the Philippines because in the beginning also briefed the latest news because now the United States can access 4 more military bases in the Philippines, and that will help the U.S. Armed Forces get very close to the Taiwan island. And of course, it's strategically located. It's very close to the South China Sea. And they already have lots of military bases in the Pacific, in Guam, in Japan. Now they can access more in the Philippines. So what's your analysis on this situation? How dangerous it is for the Pacific region?
If you look at U.S. government and U.S. arms manufacturer-funded think tanks like the RAND Corporation or CSIS, they have written entire papers about going to war with China over Taiwan. And a prerequisite for doing so is encircling China with U.S. military bases because China and their island of Taiwan is so far from the United States. The only way the United States could sustain any kind of significant military operation against China is by using military bases on foreign soils, so Japan, South Korea, and also the Philippines. And if people look at a map of where Taiwan is in relation to Okinawa, mainland Japan, the northern Philippines, you will see that is about as close as the U.S. can get. And they know that they need to get as close as possible for this to even be remotely feasible. And this is what they're doing. They're taking steps specifically to prepare for a war with China. This represents a very blatant threat to Chinese national security. And if it was the other way around, if it was China thousands of miles from its own shores, building military bases all around the United States wouldn't tolerate it for a minute. We remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was the exact same concept. The U.S. did not want the Soviet Union getting that close to the territory of the United States. And then they almost went to war over it. So the U.S. is doing this. And then as China reacts, investing in its military, because it is obviously being threatened by the U.S., who has carried out serial acts of aggression, wars of aggression just in the 21st century alone. Then they spin that in the Western media as, look at China, they're so provocative. Look at them they're building another aircraft carrier. Look at that.
Ooh. Some technical issues. I cannot see Brian now, but don't worry. So we will.
Nation being threatened is depicted as a nation threatening.
Okay, so we lost you for a few seconds, Brian.
Oh,
so,
sorry.
Just lost you for a few seconds. So maybe can you back up for the last part that you mentioned? Your screen went blue for a few seconds.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah. Okay, so what I concluded on was the United States is obviously clearly threatening China, preparing for a war against China, thousands of miles from America's own shores. Then the Western media twists China's reaction to this clear and present threat to their national security and their preparations for their military to react to this threat. They twist that around and say it's China who's aggressive and provocative and looking for a war. And they've done this repeatedly. Iraq, weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons in Syria, and China the aggressor by building up its military within its own territory.
Exactly. And before I go to you, Xiangyu, I just want to give a shout out to all the viewers who are keep the live chat going, because I see the live chat, there are lots of comments, hundreds of comments, and some viewers are very active. Huang Tua, you always there during the live chat. Thank you. I saw your comments. And Link, Eric, and who else? Oh, so many people. Sam Lei, I'm not sure whether I pronounced your name right. Thank you for leaving the comments. Thank you so much, you guys. And please hit the like button. So help this live stream to be promoted by the algorithm of YouTube, because voices of ours tend to be shadow banned by different platforms. So it's very important that we have your clicks, your interactions, your comments, and also you can always find me on different platforms. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Reddit, and TikTok. So if you lost me, if one day I'm banned from one platform, you'll find me on another platform. So, Xiangyu, do you want to comment on this? Because all these military bases are, I think they're encircling China, and they also want to use Taiwan probably as their next military bases, or they want to use Taiwan to stick it to China. So what's your thought on this?
On the Philippines, I think Brian mentioned everything that I wanted to mention, but I do want to comment on the 2025 comment and the overall increasing antagonisms between the U.S. and China, if you don't mind. Mm-hmm. So all of this is due to the U.S.'s desperate attempt to maintain its position as a world hegemon, as the world is, like I said before, departing from a unipolar world order that resulted from the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and headed towards a multipolar world order where the U.S. can no longer behave like a mob boss. And China plays a huge role in this rising multipolar world order, because reality has shown us that the U.S. can no longer compete with the developing China on peaceful terms, as we've seen with the desperate attempts to sanction companies like Huawei. And the U.S. ruling elites are increasingly considering military confrontation as an option. And this is where, unfortunately and sadly, Taiwan comes in as an excuse for the U.S., not only to destabilize mainland China, but also for U.S. warmongers to convince the American public that this encroachment on China's sovereignty is instead the defense of a so-called ally, which in reality is just a puppet regime. The U.S. ruling class, I believe, doesn't really care if a cross-strait war between mainland China and Taiwan will result in the immediate reunification of China by force. The U.S., as I see it, isn't necessarily against reunification. It's just against peaceful and stable reunification, which prevents the U.S. from using Taiwan province as an excuse to go to war with China. On the other hand, reunification by force in response to moves made by the Taiwan administration, which are in reality moves decided by the U.S., will result in a cross-strait situation that's far more volatile than any time since 1949. Recently a war game on Taiwan by the Center for Strategic and International Studies explicitly recommended the U.S. begin bombing mainland China at the earliest possible opportunity once war over Taiwan started. And that priority targets would include scientific and industrial facilities. The Western elites are looking for excuses to bomb China. And if China dares to strike back, some will even push for nuclear confrontation. They're that crazy. This is essentially the repeat of MacArthur's attitudes towards China during the Korean War. And if anything I said seems like tinfoil hatty or difficult to believe, I welcome you to read this book, Zbigniew Brzezinski's book titled The Grand Chessboard. Brzezinski was Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, co-founder of the Trilateral Commission, and an unapologetic proponent of U.S. hegemony. And in this book, he explicitly points to a situation where China and Russia are aligned against U.S. hegemony as a threat to the U.S. And this is exactly the situation we're seeing today, since the U.S. failed to win Russia over into its sphere of influence by the time Putin came to power. So I quote from this book, page 55. Potentially, the most dangerous scenario would be a great coalition of China, Russia, and perhaps Iran, an anti-hegemonic coalition united not by ideology, but by complementary grievances. And U.S. wars of aggression today are not even about, stealing resources like once upon a time, but are instead about maintaining global monopolies and preventing the rise of competitors. So while the elites throughout the West are pushing for a degrowth and Malthusian agenda, one where we are told we will own nothing and be happy. In other words, austerity on hyperdrive for the overwhelming majority of the world, for the sake of preserving the profits of the global ultra elite. China is pursuing a developmentalist path beneficial for the majority of the world's people, especially in the developing world, to the chagrin of malformoids like Klaus Schwab. This undermining of global monopolies in a dying unipolar world order led by the U.S. is threatening only to the extreme minority of people who stand to benefit from the status quo. Hence, what is portrayed as the so-called China threat in Western media should not be viewed by the average American citizen as a threat to their way of life, which are in fact being eroded by the same people who seek confrontation with China. So needless to say, despite the rhetoric of defending Taiwan, the U.S. ruling class sees the people of Taiwan as nothing but human shields and cannon fodder. The reckless policies pursued by the U.S. could result in countless deaths here in Taiwan province, and many people on the ground here intuitively realize this. True defense of Taiwan would mean respecting international law and allowing the Taiwan issue to be resolved internally by the people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait without foreign interference, whether it be through the forms of NGOs or media or all that stuff. Like I said before, the same U.S. government that's neglecting the broad masses of American people is the same U.S. government looking to provoke war with China for the sake of preserving a status quo as the global hegemon. And this has nothing to do with alleged human rights abuses or China's lack of a U.S.-approved type of democracy or anything like that. In order to stay a hegemon, the U.S. ruling class must sabotage China's development. And the only feasible option at this point is the military option, whether it be through proxy war or direct confrontation. And this will require resources and manpower that could be used instead to benefit the American people. The elites stand to benefit from this, like I've repeated like 500 times by now, while the average citizen pays the costs. Win-win cooperation, on the other hand, benefits the average citizen of both China and the United States and everywhere else. And right now, the only thing keeping America from destroying China and like World War III potentially is the farsightedness of the Chinese government. And the American people must realize their interests and those of their ruling class are not aligned. And they should fight for a government that serves the interests of the broad masses of the people and not one that wastes tax dollars on creating problems abroad instead of fixing those at home.
Brian, do you want to add something?
Yeah, actually, Xiangyu was talking about the U.S. not necessarily being against reunification. That is something I think they understand is going to happen. It's inevitable. And if you look at, say, the last 20 years or so, you could see how reunification was an ongoing process. It was happening slowly but surely. And ironically, in 2014, when the U.S. was overthrowing the elected government in Ukraine, it was also stirring up trouble in Hong Kong, the umbrella movement, and on Taiwan, they had the sunflower movement. And that was designed specifically to get into the middle of increasing efforts on both sides of the strait toward reunification. So that they artificially put it on hold or tried to roll it back, just like they did in Ukraine and what they were trying to do in Hong Kong. Something else he said was about Brzezinski worried about China, Russia, and Iran getting together because of shared grievances with the West rather than ideology. I would say right now they have both. The multipolar world has the ideology, if you could call it that, a multipolarism. They understand the benefit this has for themselves and for the rest of the world. And they have shared grievances, significant shared grievances. So I think all of these things combined, this is the worst case scenario for U.S. hegemony. And just the idea of the U.S. telling China, you're not going to be allowed to surpass us. You have a population larger than the G7 combined, but you're not allowed to surpass us. We won't let it happen. U.S. President Joe Biden has said this in speeches. He's not going to allow China to surpass the U.S. What does that mean? What does it mean when you claim everyone is equal, but a nation with many more people isn't going to have a bigger economy or a stronger military, and you're not going to allow them to? What does that say? It's the mask slipping off, and it's this obsession the U.S. and the West in general has with hegemony over the planet and the inability to allow other nations to kind of rise up in a very natural way too. One more thing. So the U.S. knows reunification is inevitable. They want China to pay the highest cost possible for that reunification. They do not want it to be peaceful. They know inevitably, if the status quo holds, it will be peaceful. So this is what they're doing. They're going to make the price as high as humanly possible. If you read the CSIS war game regarding the Chinese invasion of Taiwan, they say, if the People's Liberation Army doesn't take these ports, before they take these ports, if they don't destroy them, we should destroy them. So what they're saying is, one way or the other, absolutely everything on Taiwan is going to be destroyed. That is their vision for defending Taiwan, if you could call it that. It's again another blatant proxy war that the people on Taiwan are going to pay the full cost for, not the U.S.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that Biden says they will not allow China to compete with the U.S. Decades ago when he traveled to China, he said to the Chinese public that America is not afraid of rising China. The U.S. welcomes a rising China. But of course, back then, China hadn't reached the economic level. But now, when you're about to reach that economic level, they suddenly thought, we will not let that happen. So this is their statement. And of course, the peaceful reunification with Taiwan is a commitment of China. And I assure you, that's the thing that every Chinese person wants to do, a peaceful reunification. We have 1.4 billion people in the Chinese mainland, and we may not agree on everything. But for the issue about Taiwan, I assure you, almost 99% of all Chinese want a peaceful reunification with Taiwan, and we would never, because of remember the history. It's not just because of the Civil War. It was taken by Japan during the colonial time, and now Hong Kong, Macau returned to China, and Taiwan was the last piece of the legacy, or maybe I should use another word, of the colonial time So remember this humiliation. Just imagine the humiliation to Chinese people. So it's losing our own territory to imperial power, to a colonizer. The colonizer cannot be accepted by any Chinese anymore. So of course we all want peaceful reunification. But if, as I show you, the China stance, if any foreign forces want to intervene, or if any separatists want to use this opportunity to create the so-called Taiwan independence, well, China is promised to use any means possible to deter that to happen. So, okay, so we do this live stream about 1 hour. Before we let you go, do you gentlemen want to add something else that I haven't asked? Xiangyu, how about you?
I think most things are covered, but I just want to do one thing. Live chat. One's in the chat if you think Li Jingjing and Brian are based. Two's in the chat if you think Joe Biden is based. Okay. But no, I really want to thank you, Li Jingjing, and for inviting us on, and I want to thank you, Brian, for making me look good, being alongside somebody with such great insights. And I especially want to thank everyone who's tuning in live now or watching this later for taking the time to listen to our voices that are not things that you can regularly hear on Western mainstream media.
Wow, a lot of one in the live chat. Whoa, all the ones people typing one, flooding in the live chat. Woo, thank you. Thank all of you. Big shout out to you guys who are active in the live chat. Okay, Brian, what about you?
Yes, I want to point one thing out that I think is utterly essential. We see a lot of people waking up to the reality of what is a proxy war in Ukraine against Russia. So there's people who tune into my videos and they agree. They agree with everything that I'm saying. But then when it comes to China, they're repeating U.S. State Department talking points. And this is something we have to work hard to fix, to help people realize that if you were lied to by the U.S. about Iraq, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, you can clearly see the U.S. is waging a proxy war against Russia over Ukraine. Surely China and Taiwan, this is not the first thing the United States is telling the truth about. So we have to make it very clear what's really going on regarding Taiwan, that it is directly connected to the U.S. proxy war in Ukraine against Russia. This is about containing peer and near-peer competitors, not just Russia, but Russia and China. And there's a reason why Russia and China are working together. They have a lot of mutual interests together, but they also face this common threat. And it is the United States, and it is its desire to maintain primacy over the planet. So we have to really work hard against whatever this is in people's minds, where they irrationally hate China and are willing to believe the U.S., their lies about China. And I think it's that they do know that they're being lied to about China. They just don't like China. And unfortunately, across the West, racism plays a huge role in it. The idea that Chinese people can create a society that surpasses the white West. A lot of people have a real problem with that, and they shouldn't. It's irrational, but they do. And this is going to play a huge factor, not only in this misunderstanding, this gap between what people understand about Ukraine but don't understand about Taiwan, but it's going to play a big role in marshaling support for potential war with China. So I think this is something we're going to have to work hard to try to address. Thank you so much for having me on. Xiangyu, always a pleasure. And we just got to keep working together on this.
Okay. And I want to, because you mentioned some people, even the people who are very critical of the Western governments, they don't believe most of the things that the U.S. government says. For example, they're critical of many policies of U.S. government. They don't believe the lies that the U.S. said about Iraq. But then when it comes to China, they suddenly believe all the lies. They will say, oh, I don't like the U.S. government, but China is not any better because well, look what they do to the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. I mean, it's like now, why wouldn't they talk about China? Suddenly you believe all their lies. I just tweeted yesterday on my Twitter because there's a branch on UN Human Rights Council. So they did a report claiming that the kids in Tibet were forced into this assimilation program. They are not allowed to learn their language, so they cannot speak Tibetan. They couldn't communicate with their parents. And then in the picture, in the tweet, along with the picture, they used a picture of Tibetan kids reading and writing in Tibetan. The textbook was in Tibetan. So, I mean, what they said in the tweet is contradicting in the picture. So, I mean, it's hilarious that they are debunking themselves. They cannot, I know, there are always lies. So I think it's important also for all of us to remember that that's their strategy. First is to demonize a country they want to conquer or take down. First to demonize, say, claim they are doing the worst, the most horrible things ever, and then preparing the public for a war, potential war with the country, like what they're doing with China. Like they're already preparing the American public for potential war with China, just like what they did, preparing the American public for a war with Iraq. And so all of these demonizations, all these lies are justifications for them to start a war in the future. So if you are critical of what they said before, so also be critical what they said about China, because there are a lot of lies. And if you want to know more truth about stories in China, or you want to know more about what happened in Xinjiang or Tibet, you can come to my channel. I made a lot of videos on my channel because I constantly go to those regions. And you also can go to Brian Berletic's channel. He debunked a lot of lies, point you to where the documents are, and shows the U.S. government's the infiltrations, their plans in those regions. So, I mean, you can go, and also you can go to Xiangyu's. Xiangyu, let us know where to find you. I know you've been banned on Twitter. How can we find you?
I'm banned on Twitter. I do have a YouTube channel, but that's mostly for my music. New music videos are coming out soon, though, so you can look forward to that.
Oh, by the way, Xiangyu is a rapper, if you don't know. So his music is coming out.
I'm on Telegram. If you follow my YouTube channel, the links are all over there. I think there is a link tree or something like that, and you can find my Telegram there.
Cool.
Actually, I'll leave the link in the live chat.
Yeah, sure. And also maybe also in the comment section. Cool. So you know where to find Xiangyu, and also you know Brian Berletic's network, the New Atlas, the channel. A lot of you are his avid fans. And he's also on Twitter. You know where to find him. So thank you, guys. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining this discussion. Very insightful analysis. I really appreciated your analysis on this. And also big shout out, a big appreciation to all of you who are watching this live stream, who keep the live chat going. Thank you so much for your support. And you can, just like I said, you can find me on YouTube, on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, TikTok. Our voices, our stories are often being shadow banned by different platforms. So follow me on multiple platforms so you can find me if one day I'm being shadow banned on one platform. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know what topics you want to hear in the next live stream. Leave a comment and I will try to make the topic that you want to hear. So see you the next time. Bye.